mama said, don't give up, it's a little complicated.
We're the ones who step up for each other. I've got your back, you've got mine. Kindness, humility, empathy. It's not just talk, it's who we are. It's who we always have been. And no one can take that from us. The movement to bring it back, it started here. And here. And here. In school gymnasiums, community centers, the living room down the block. You'll be where? Okay, we'll be there. Who are we? We're the movement that will beat Donald Trump. Welcome. We're going to have to sweat for it. We're going to have to sacrifice and fight. We're going to have to lead. Everyone is going to have to lead with kindness, humility, empathy, and not just talk, but action. Action today, action tomorrow. Action until we win. And we will win if we do this together. It's who we are. It's who we always have been. Now let's show them.
Please welcome the former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Pete Buttigieg, and Vice President Joe Biden.
Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this very successful grassroots event to continue building the movement that's going to deliver Joe Biden as our next president of the United States and defeat Donald Trump. I'm so pleased to be with you. I know we've got people joining from every part of the country. I know a lot of you were part of Pete for America too, and I thank you for being there for that effort and for joining me as we all become part of one team determined to make sure that we are there to get Joe Biden elected the next president. You've probably heard me say this before, but I want to make sure I say it again. This is not just about what we're up against. I think anybody on this call knows how urgent, how imperative it is for the lives of those we love, for the future of our communities, for the future of U.S. leadership in the world to defeat Donald Trump. But the opportunity in front of us right now is more than that. It's a chance to have a leader, to have a president of the United States who cares, actually cares about us and about our lives, who is guided by a sense of compassion that will be so critically important to this nation getting on its feet and moving forward. And to have compassion coupled with competence, somebody who knows what he's doing and will surround himself with others who know what they are doing, is what it will take for our country to move forward, to get out of this emergency, and to come back stronger than ever. This isn't just about what we're against. It's about what we're for, and I'm proud to be for Joe Biden. I also want to editorialize for a second on a tactical question. I hear sometimes with my friends in the Democratic Party a bit of hand-wringing over the question, how can we mount an effective campaign when everything has moved into the virtual space, especially when you got the president out there waving his arms and drawing attention to himself, often with shocking or even grotesque statements or actions. This is a good time to remember that our nominee will not, should not, and won't want to get the kind of attention that a sitting president of the United States gets for suggesting that people inject themselves with bleach. What we have is an opportunity to rally behind a candidate who is doing the work every day, even if the circumstances require that more often than not, that work be done from within the four walls of home. And yet, Joe Biden every day is talking to voters, talking to reporters, taking tough questions, engaging with different people who can bring their support from the grassroots financial support that everyone on this call is offering to the advocacy groups with such important issues at stake. He's doing the work. The question is, are all of us doing what we can to help? So if you ever catch yourself asking that question, how can we compete in this transformed virtual campaign reality? Remember that you are the answer to that question. What you do to participate in a virtual phone bank, to be active on social media in a positive fashion, to reach out to people you know to make sure that they are motivated to vote and that they know how to vote, knowing that the mechanics of our elections are changing too. That makes you the answer to that question of how we're going to compete and how we're going to win. Our soon-to-be nominee is already doing everything that he can do and more. But you already know that you're part of the answer because you're on this call. And so I want to thank you for your presence. I want to thank you for your contributions. I want to thank you in advance for what you're going to do in the weeks and months to come to draw others into this fight, to be there at our side. And with that, it's my great pride and pleasure to introduce the next president of the United States, Joe Biden.
Hey, Pete, thank you very, very much. You've been an incredible, incredible partner. And, I've said this before, but our listeners should hear it. Pete's a man of enormous integrity, of physical courage as a soldier and moral courage as a leader. And there's no limit what he's going to do for this world. I'm so glad you're with me, Pete, and be prepared. If I win, you're not going anywhere if I have anything to do with it. I'm going to need your help. And and thanks above all for every single one of you joining this crowd today. I'm told there's over 35,000 of you, and for chipping in to make this team go. We're off to a great start. You've raised, as of a short while ago, over $1 million for this event, and we've now raised well over 65% of everything we have raised, less than $30. We have a real grassroots effort because of Pete opening up his supporters and others doing the same. And I know these are tough times, so your support means even more. Some of you have been with us from day one when the media and pundits counted us out. You were there, your faith kept me going. And others, you've just joined, and we welcome you, we need you, and together I think we're gonna bring this country back and win it back. You know, folks, this is, as a coach I used to have say, this is go time. We have less than 6 months to Election Day. And Donald Trump has been raising money since the day after he was elected in 2016, after we got elected in 2008. And, we knew this was going to be the most important election of our lifetime. And this national crisis now makes it even more of a matter of life and death in a literal sense. The polling data, the Columbia University pointed out that if this president had stopped thinking about himself and just moved a week earlier, we would have saved over 36,000 lives, just moving a week earlier. But that's another story. The character of our country is on the ballot, and millions of lives and livelihoods are as well. And there's no time to waste. As I said, over 95,000 Americans have died so far. We're facing the worst economic depression since the Great Depression. It's a disaster. It's not a depression yet, but the way things are moving, we're in real trouble. And the worst of all, it didn't have to be this way. Donald Trump ignored the warnings, refused to prepare, and failed to protect the nation. As I said, disease experts indicated that it didn't have to be this way. If he had worked 2 weeks earlier, over 50,000 people wouldn't have died. And COVID is still alive. And if he's taken this crisis any seriously any sooner, we wouldn't be in such deep economic hole. COVID is the match that lit this fire. But Donald Trump has spent the last 3 years undermining the core pillars of our economic strength. Just imagine where we'd be if we had that $2 trillion tax cut that went overwhelmingly to the wealthy in order to be able to fight this issue. Imagine if he invested in manufacturing at home instead of incentivizing companies to send jobs overseas. Imagine if he expanded access to health care instead of fighting to strip millions of Obamacare, even in the middle of this pandemic. When Trump ran in 2016, and you've heard me say it before, but I can't say it enough, he said he was going to stand up for the forgotten man. But as soon as he got elected, he forgot the forgotten man. Now we're seeing the telling signs of Trumponomics in a way that he's implementing this stimulus. No strings attached. $2 trillion. He got rid of what the Congress voted to have an inspector general to oversee where the money's going, to make sure everybody was on the straight and narrow. He fired him. No strings, no oversight, no accountability. It's shaping up to be what I call a corrupt recovery. 40% of the initial small business funds didn't go to small businesses at all. The single biggest recipient of of small business loan was a hotel executive and a major Trump donor. He gave the money back because it got exposed. We have a thing called the mainstream lending program that Congress passed 3 months ago. It hasn't lent a single dollar so far. Folks, look, we have to rebuild the backbone of this country. Pete's talked about it. He's done it as a mayor, and he's done it as a candidate. You know, we have to build it more stronger, more inclusive, more resilient middle class. And this time we got to bring everybody along, of all colors, of all disabilities. We have to just bring them along. So we can't withstand the next public health crisis the way we've gone through this one. There will be others, whatever comes our way. Today we have an enormous opportunity to make our country work for millions of ordinary women and men who build it, who are capable of doing extraordinary things. That's who I believe in. That's who Pete believes in. That's why we're running. That's what we're fighting for. We're fighting for them. You know, in a crisis, character is revealed, just like Pete's character is revealed in Afghanistan and everything he's ever done when he stood up and came out. It's character. Well, we're seeing the soul of America now. We're seeing the character shine through of all America. This is the United States of America. There's not a single thing we can't do if we do it together. So I want to thank you all for your faith. Now I want to get to work. And with that, Pete, I'm going to turn it back to you. I understand you have some questions. But just remember this, folks. It's not enough for us just to come back. We have to come back better than we were. We have to deal with the institutional impediments based on race, ethnicity, the whole thing. There's so much because the blinders have been taken off. People have seen who's been carrying us on our back. Ordinary, hard-working people who are getting not paid very much money. They're coping, they're moving. The character of the country's shining through. And that's why I'm confident we'll get through this. And I'm confident we can build a better, stronger country than we had when we got into this. So sorry to go on, Pete. I apologize, but I'm ready for your questions. And
terrific. Well, thank you for such a powerful statement that reminds us what a president looks like, guiding our country to a better place than we used to be. Even some things we used to take for granted, like just calling us to our values, that we can't live without right now. You're right. There are a bunch of questions that have come in from audience members, and I've got a couple of my own. I want to make sure to slide in there. A lot of questions about policy and substance. But just before we get to that, I'd love to hear a little more about your experience of the virtual campaign trail. No presidential candidate in history has faced quite the combination of experiences that you are right now, having to continue a national campaign and schedule while for safety reasons having to do so much of it from right where you are. What's the hardest part, and is there a fun part to it as well?
Well, like you, Pete, I miss being out. I get energy from interfacing with people face to face, hold it up, and I just miss seeing people, looking in their eyes, but we're meeting an awful lot of people, hearing about their lives, getting to see the goodness and decency of American people up close every day, and that's what this whole business is all about. The American people. It's about listening to what they care about. You know, one of the things that I think is so important is, Jill always says, it's important, Joe, you tell people why you want to do what you're going to do and then tell them how you're going to do it. And so it's important to find ways to give people hope because there's reason for hope and fighting every day to make a difference in their lives. You know, these are, as to state the obvious, unprecedented times. But our campaign, with your help, is moving full speed to find new ways to meet voters where they are online. And that has been some fun. You know, take this, for example. Today, 35,000 people we brought together in many ways. This is a situation is making our campaign even more interactive in a sense than it was before. I never drew a crowd of 35 million people. We're building a movement that's based on yours as well, that's even more accessible to everybody. So, we've also built this studio in my house, and we've had so far 160 million views of video content out of this basement just since March. And, we're holding virtual rallies, roundtables, town halls with young people, frontline workers, labor unions, families, and families who've lost people. Giving speeches, briefings, interviews with everyone from the morning cable to late night TV to local news, just as I would have done before. And our digital operation is scaling up fast. we've stolen some people from your operation to help with our digital piece, and thank you for letting that happen. No, I really mean it. And you know, this is every campaign has something new about it. But we've recruited and trained thousands of volunteers, literally thousands of volunteers, and to produce and share content and identify new supporters online, and many of whom are with us today, thanks to you. I've always said this campaign is a battle for the soul of the nation, but this battle is for the soul of the internet as well. I think we can win online by connecting people, not tearing them apart, by showing compassion, not cruelty, by building a strategy that reflects the campaign we're running. And so I need everybody on this call to join us and download our Team Joe app to help us spread the word. One other thing, you know, the pundits, who are always sort of like sometimes me, an election behind here, the pundits are talking about, well, Trump is out there and he's moving. Well, you know, the more he talks, the worse he gets. I'm not being facetious when I say that. You know, it doesn't mean it's going to end up this way, but right now, every single poll shows every time he goes out, his numbers go down. And across the board in all the toss-up states, because of your help and others, we're winning. But I don't think that his being out there has helped him very much. Like you said, you know, he says he's taking a malaria medicine, which is proved to be dangerous, that if you take it, he's talking about injecting bleach in your body. I mean, what in God's name is going on? He continues to startle me every day with the foolish things he says. But I think it's going to get rougher. He's going to get meaner. But I think that it's important we just tell people the truth. Just lay out what we know, tell them the truth, follow the science, and move on.
Well, I love this idea of the soul of the internet, and I think about how it might become a different place if the leader of the free world were mindful of that, engaging virtually. And I love this idea that we're at the virtual equivalent of a 35,000 person gathering, and what we could never do physically is that all at once we're gathering people from every part of the country. I bet we've even got some Democrats abroad on the line, Americans around the world. So thrilled that we're able to do this technologically. Let me take you, you touched on this a little bit in your remarks, but I want to make sure there's an opportunity to discuss specifically the steps that you would take when it comes to preventing the next pandemic, because we know the public health threats are going to continue. It's going to be a big part of our security in the decades to come. So as president, what are the steps that you can and will do to ensure that we never experience a crisis like what we're experiencing right now?
Pete, I know you know this. Our experience, Barack and mine, with Ebola made it very clear that COVID pandemic has had real potential to wash over the world. And I wish I'd been wrong, but the lesson from Ebola was the U.S. has to step up and lead. And we did it then. We rallied the world. We raised $20 billion to help other countries who didn't have the wherewithal, the capacity. We even had our military going abroad, building hospitals, et cetera, and for disaster assistance. We were pushing the NIH to discover new treatments, protecting our citizens. 60-plus companies followed suit, contributing $2 billion to thousands of health workers and producing thousands of health workers to deal with the last pandemic, which was able to be stopped. And after we formed the White House Office on Global Health Security, that was supposed to be within the president's, within the White House, because we knew another pandemic would come. You cannot keep diseases out of your country by building a wall. It's just, you can't do it. And so, but what we put this whole security team together, we had. But Trump went ahead and he eliminated the pandemic office. He sought big cuts in the National Institute of Health and the Center for Disease Control. He undermined the international cooperation that we needed to be safe. Unfortunately, it's clearer than ever the deadly mistakes he's made. Disease experts, as I said earlier, said that if Trump acted just a week earlier, 36,000 more Americans would be alive today. And as president, I'll make sure we never are unprepared again. I'm going to boost funding with the help of you and others helping me get it done for biomedical research and disease surveillance. improve our emergency response capacity by investing in public health first responders, restore the White House Office of Global Security, re-engage with the world, and fully fund the global health security agenda so we're ready to prevent the next outbreak. And, I'm going to look, what just happened. The World Health Organization had a meeting. The president didn't show up. We didn't send anybody. And guess what? China stepped in and filled the void. China came up and said, we're going to contribute a couple $2 billion to the effort. Now China, which is probably responsible for a lot of what's happened, China all of a sudden is leading. The United States of America is absent at the creation. I'm going to fight climate change, which worsens health threats and undermines global health security. We're going to build a stronger, more inclusive middle class to make a more resilient economy for the future. But also, we've learned that one of the reasons why you have disproportionate deaths, if you live in a predominantly black county, you're 6 times more likely to die from this crisis than if you live in a predominantly white county. Well, there's underlying causes for this to begin with. We have to deal with dealing with how we're going to move and make sure that the inherent diseases that exist, particularly in poor communities, that in fact relate to everything from obesity to how we deal with a whole range of issues. Why are infant mortality rates so much higher in the black community, in the white community? Why is diabetes so much higher? With the help of you and others, we're going to make sure that we not only fully fund programs, we're going to invest significant amounts of money in research. And what I'd be doing right now, for example, and I'm going on too long, I apologize, but one more point. I propose we invest right now $25 billion now for the federal government to start to determine how we will distribute vaccine to over 300 million Americans when the vaccine comes. It will come. But the last damn thing we need is find a vaccine and not know how to get it made in large quantities and where and how to distribute it. It's a federal responsibility. A federal responsibility. And he's walked away. You hear him say, I take no responsibility. There's a lot we can do, Pete. We can get this done. We'll get through it. But we have to move.
What a great point about the vaccine. The moment the vaccine is invented is not when our problems end. It sets up a huge challenge. And I for one, will be thankful for that to happen on your watch, to rise to that challenge.
Well, one of the things you talked about, Pete, is here they have an international meeting of all the countries and all the companies around the world that are working on a vaccine. We don't show up. Okay. Great. Isn't that wonderful? What happens if the what happens if the effort in England comes forward first? We're the back of the line. And by the way, when this happens, and you talked about this, when they finally get a vaccine, it's overwhelmingly in our interest that it get to the rest of the world in addition to us. What in God's name happens if we have everybody have the vaccine in America, or we have it that it gets out to everybody, but we have a circumstance where we don't have it in Latin America or Africa or South? Where does this go? It just causes next waves of this problem. So there's so much we can do. It's not rocket science, but it's about taking responsibility, I think.
So, absolutely. And let me throw in, since we're looking to the future, I want to throw in along the same lines, but on maybe a lighter topic. I know in my own mind, I'm building a list of things and places that I can't wait to see or do when it becomes safe to do so. So I'm wondering, once it's safe to move about freely again, do you know what the first place is that you want to go?
Well, that's going to sound really, really corny. The first place I want to go is I want to get all my grandkids up here. And I have 6 of them. But, the places that I want to go, I want to be out and looking people in the eye. I want to be into the states that, in fact, are hit the hardest. People are I want to hear about their lives and let them know and to see the goodness and decency of the American people up close every single day. I hope we're going to be able to campaign and meet with people in person again. Until then, we got to continue to find community in groups just like this one. But there are also physical places I'd like to go. I'd like to go back down to the beach in Rehoboth. I'd like to be able to take my My grandkids who haven't been out to see the Grand Canyon, which is magnificent, like a giant cathedral. It's an amazing thing. There's a whole bunch of things that I'd like to do, and we're all going to get a chance to do them.
We're just looking forward to that.
How about you? What's the first thing you want to do? Where do you want to go?
There's a burger place downtown called CJ's here, and just the thought of that burger waiting for me is one of the things that's getting me through things. But like you say, it's more about the people I can't wait to see and hug and spend time with than any one physical place, maybe. Yeah. All right, I want to make sure I'm not hogging the ball here. So a lot of people who are joining us have their questions too, and the first one that's coming from the audience is from Amy in New York. It's about coping with loss in the COVID pandemic, and so I'm just gonna I'll read her question word for word. She says, "I work at a New York City hospital and have been on the front lines throughout this pandemic. Trump seems unable to express empathy when speaking to families who've lost someone to COVID. What would you say to comfort them?"
Amy, first of all, thank you. And I am in constant contact and talking with the nurses here in Delaware and in the Philadelphia area. My son-in-law is a surgeon up at Jefferson Hospital in Philly. I just got working with the nurses down with our largest hospital, Christiana Hospital, and the docs. I mean, look, first of all, what people don't understand is, maybe they do understand, but the enormous risk you've taken and the enormous loss we've had among our first responders, including nurses and docs and paramedics and the like. I have been, unfortunately, a significant consumer of healthcare, having lost my wife and daughter when I first got elected in an automobile accident. My two boys were badly injured, and then I was hospitalized for a while with a major embolism, and spent time years ago in the ICU, and then watching my son die for over almost a year and a half with stage 4 glioblastoma. And the reason I bother to mention that is I think nurses are the single most underappreciated, misunderstood profession in the world. Doctors, figuratively speaking, allow you to live. Nurses make you want to live. I watched how they were with my boys when they were a kid and hospitalized after that accident. I watched how they treated my son. And what people don't understand is the enormous psychological pressure on all of you. I don't think they understand, and I hope you're taking advantage of it, basically the post-traumatic stress that so many nurses and docs deal with. I don't know how many times you probably had to hold a phone to a patient's ear so they could say goodbye or have their family say goodbye to them. That takes an enormous toll on you, on the first responders. That's number one. But number two, I think beyond that, one of the things we have to appreciate is that, it's hard to tell anybody. Everybody grieves differently. But those 95,000 people, they left behind whole communities. They left behind moms, dads, mothers, fathers. They've left behind sons, daughters. And my heart goes with you and all your colleagues, and the heart of every one of those families who's lost someone to COVID. As I said, $95,000 doesn't do anything at all. You could be a millionaire. You could have $950,000. You could have $90 billion. It doesn't take away that feeling that of those 95,000 people we lost, their families. You feel like you're being sucked into a black hole in the middle of your chest, and you don't know what to do about it. It's just this enormous sense of loss. But I tell them, it's going to take time. It's going to take time, but I promise you, the day will come when the memory of your son, your daughter, your husband, wife, mom, dad, the person you lost, is going to bring a smile to your lips before it brings a tear to your eye. That's in my experience, when you're going to know you're going to be able to make it. And I promise you, that moment will come. Meanwhile, we're going to fight with everything we have to get this country the leadership it needs so we don't face something like this again. Every one of those 35,000 people on this call are fighting for this too. You know, there's a quote, and Pete and I share a kind of basic faith here that I always quote about Kierkegaard, the philosopher and the theologian. He said, faith sees best in the dark. It's hard to keep your faith and have faith when you've just had an incredible loss. But the truth of the matter is, the time is going to come when the memory, as I said, is going to bring a smile before a tear. And I have faith in the American people. They're strong, they're giving, they're resilient. They've always come together in times of crisis. And together we have the expertise, the will, and the spirit to overcome what we're going through now. But the last point I'll make is that I'm sure you know this, Amy, that I found, everybody grieves differently, but I found that I found an answer in finding purpose. Purpose. And I think that, one of the things that my beau, who I lost, who was my soul, Hunter's my heart, my other son, but it's, I knew what he wanted me to do. And I knew that he knew that I'd take care of the family. And I wrote about this, but he was worried I would withdraw and stop doing the things I worked on my whole life. But I know how important it was to him as well. He was the Attorney General of the state of Delaware, like Pete. He spent a year in harm's way, in his case, in Iraq. He won the Bronze Star, the Conspicuous Service Medal. And what he was worried about when he was dying was that I'd sort of give up and I'd walk away. And I found that having the purpose to stay involved in the things that he cared about and I cared about has been the sort of the saving grace for me. Everybody's different. I'm not suggesting that the way I get through it is the same way everybody else gets through it. But I think if you're going to find purpose, just remember, he or she, no matter what the relationship was, the love you had, they're still with you. They're still with you. They're still part of you. They're in your heart. And only advice I would give is try to think, what would they want you to be doing? What would they want you to be doing? What would they want? And I think if you focus on that and work on that, I think you're going to find you'll get through it sooner than later. But right now, everything I've just said for those people who've lost these 95,000 folks in the last 3 months sounds hollow. But at least that's what worked for me.
What a compassionate answer. And it reminds me of something that, again, supporters of our campaign heard me talk about a lot, which is the presidency. Yes, about policy. Yes, about administration and management, but above all about values and the tone that's set. And I'm just picturing what it would be like to live in a country where your kind of compassion is what we hear out of the Oval Office. So thanks for that. I want to make sure
let me say one thing about you. You get it. You get it. Growing up as a gay man, wondering from the time you're a kid how this works, what's going to go on, and coming forward, and you remember the people who were empathetic. You remember the people who supported you. You remember the help you had. We've not had this talk, but I just know you. And when you've been the recipient of that empathy, it's so much easier to give it. I mean, and think about it. There's so many people who've gone through things very different things, but that you and I have gone through with so much less support, so much less help, so much less empathy. But they get up every single day and put one foot in front of the other. They're amazing. There's amazing number of people in America that have so much courage. And that's what keeps me going about why I'm so certain about the future of this country, for real.
Well, I can't wait to see that kind of courage affirmed and lifted up from the highest office in the land. So thank you. I want to turn now to a question that came in from Maryland. I know it's definitely on my mind and so many of us about election integrity. This is from Marty in Maryland, and I'll just read you the questions that came in from Marty. There's so much confusion around voting. People wonder if their vote will count, if the election will be fair, and if they'll be safe at the polls. How will you inspire them to vote anyway?
Look, Marty, by the way, one half my family, all of my dad's family is from Maryland, or as they used to say, Baltimore. Look, this is, I think we'd all agree, not because I'm running or Pete ran, this is the most important election of our lifetime. It's bigger than any party. It's bigger than whether a Democrat or Republican wins. It's about the character of the country's on the ballot. And the lives and livelihoods are as well. And throughout our history, we've held elections in the toughest times. In the middle of the Civil War, we held an election. 2 world wars, the 1918 flu epidemic. And we're going to do it again this year. And we can protect our democracy and public health at the same time. But it's going to take some work. You know, I've listened to public health experts. As a matter of fact, I have an hour-and-a-half meeting every morning with them on the phone. I just got off that phone today. It took place at noon. But, you know, and I listen to them, and I have to, the public health folks, figure out how now, as a nation, we'll be able to conduct a fair and safe election. The Wisconsin primary last month sent a giant warning flare-up. Republicans are trying to force in-person voting to suppress turnout, no matter the health consequences, and narrowing the number of voting places. To be clear, no one should be asked to risk their life to cast a vote, number one. So we have to provide every citizen with every option to exercise their right to vote in person and by mail. Now, with the right support, state and local officials can get this done. Congress has to do its part, which it's doing now, to get the funding they need in order to be able to get it done. Trump is already trying to undermine trust with false claims about voter fraud and threatening to block essential COVID assistance if extra funds go to the Postal Service. He's talking about cutting funding for the Postal Service, so you can't mail in ballots. I mean, come on. But let's get real. Voting rights have been under assault since the Supreme Court decision in 2013 in Shelby versus Holder, which gutted voter protection. Now, as president, and before this, before we get there, we have to insist that 2 things happen. Our colleague Amy, who ran with us, Amy Klobuchar, she has a really first-rate piece of legislation. She says we should be able to fund, you get a stamp envelope with a ballot in it that you can fill out and send in. Cost money. The federal government should be paying to subsidize that, so states are able to do that. And guess what? The president says that's full of fraud. Well, guess what? He sat behind the desk in the Oval Office, filled out an absentee ballot, and mailed it to Florida. I mean, is his vote fraudulent? Secondly, we have to make sure that we provide for early voting. The reason for early voting is so you can have enough polling places open, and you can have social distancing at the facility, so that you don't have everybody having to vote in the same 8, 10, 12-hour period. So if you have it for a week ahead of time, you'll be able to do it in a way you can do it safely. Thirdly, we should be right now training poll workers to how to deal with and sanitize and wipe down and deal with making it safe, whether it's the machine or a paper ballot, whichever it ends up being. We can do that. They should be being trained right now. In addition to that, if you talked about this when you were running, and you and I talked about it together, as president, I'll restore a full Voting Rights Act. You know, I'll support automatic same-day voter registration. I'm going to pass a Safe Election Act to help find and secure state voting systems. I'm going to show foreign governments that, hey, there'll be steep price to pay for interfering in our elections like the Russians are still trying to do.
Right.
This crisis exists. It's crystal clear now how much matters who's in the White House. And I'm going to remind the American people every day in every corner of this country how much their vote counts and is going to determine the future. And I'll conclude by saying, think about it. There are already 5 states who do basically all mail-in voting. 2 of them, I'd argue 3, are Republican states with Republican governors, Republican legislatures. So the president's trying to work up another phony rationale that there's, voting by mail is fraudulent. Well, as I said, I assume his vote doesn't count. Anyway, there's just,
It's a great point. If it's good enough for the president, it ought to be
why isn't it good enough for
all
us?
We just, Chasten and I just got our absentee ballots in the mail with the Indiana primary coming up. Looking forward to casting my vote for you and all the offices there. And it's mystifying that the president thinks he can do it, but others shouldn't have the chance. Okay, I know we're pressing up close to our time limit. I want to tuck one more question in because it's actually one I was curious about too. It's about a workout schedule. So I like to think myself as pretty fit. I was the command fitness leader for my military unit. I exercised a lot, and the campaign trail beat the hell out of me. And whenever I saw you, you always had a spring in your step. So I'm equally curious about the question. It comes from Sherry in Georgia. And her question is simply, what workout schedule are you following to stay fit?
Sherry, I don't have my cell phone with me, but maybe I do. Hang on a second.
Oh.
Every day I get a schedule sent to me. There was a guy who was, hang on a second here. There was a guy, a colonel in the United States Army who was over in the White House, his name is Drew. He's a colonel. He's about to retire. And he was a physical therapist, a doctor. And I started off when I had a rotary cuff replaced in my left arm. This is years ago. And you got to really work at it to make sure you get it back. And I got full range back. So, but every day, Drew, and he's been doing this since that time, he sends me a different workout every day that I do in my gym upstairs. This time he said, let's work the arms to finish up this week. 5 minutes in a rowing machine, 30 minutes on the bike, 2 times 23 bicep easy curls, 45 pounds or more, go heavy, 23 crunches, 2 times, he has everything added up to 46, the 46th president. And I wish I'd been the 20th president. It'd be a lot easier. But anyway, 2 times, 23 crunches, 2 times 23 tricep pull-down cables, 23 more crunches, 2 times 23 seated hammer curls with 35 pounds, 23 jumping jacks, 2 times 23 tri-tip skull crushers, the one you lie on your back and you bring the bar back, and then 23 jumping jacks. Yesterday he said, Joe, boss, leg day. Reverse lunges, 23, squats, mountain climbers, standing toe touches, leg presses, calf races, take 5-minute break, reverse lunges, squats, jumping jacks. So he gives me a different workout every day. And now I have to admit to you, since there's 2 people working this, I did not do it this morning because I started off on a show at 7:30 this morning. But unfortunately, as my wife reminds me, and she works out every day, I have a break between this night when this ends and you and I finish up for another hour and a half. So I'm heading up to the gym.
Well, now we know. That's helps to explain it. That's quite a workout.
Well, the big difference. I don't want to mislead anybody. When I was when I was in my 30s, I could go for 2 weeks without doing anything and pick up where I left off. The difference is now if I go for 3 or 4 days without anything, it's almost back to zero. But well, here's how I think about age too. I think I told you this once. Satchel Paige was probably I think, the best pitcher in the history of baseball, an African-American who didn't get to go to the majors till he was 45 years old, pitched to win on his 47th birthday, beat the Chicago Cubs. He pitched for St. Louis. And everybody went in, all the sports writers went in and said, Satch, amazing. On your 47th birthday, the oldest pitcher in American history ever to pitch a win, et cetera. He said, how do you feel about it? He said, boys, that's not how I look at age. And he said, how do you look at it? And I've adopted Satchel Paige's notion. He said, I look at it this way. How old would you be if you didn't know how old you are? I'm 49. This is my...
Remember that.
How old would you
Well,
be if you didn't know how old you were? Except every once in a while it comes back because I can't quite do all the lifting I did before. Anyway.
Well, sounds like a pretty punishing schedule, and we don't want to get in the way of VPPT, so I know we're going to have to wrap, but I might have to ask you for some tips on that.
No, you don't need my tips. You're in great shape.
So, look, I know we've come up past our time. I want to thank you again for taking time to speak to so many supporters and include everybody in the process. And I also want to thank everybody who signed up for this. Now, I'll end with something I said earlier. If you're wondering how we're going to compete in a new world of campaigning, you are a big part of the answer, just watching this and participating in this event.
Exactly
and so,
right.
you can contribute right now. There's a link available right in front of you, or you can do it the old-fashioned way, if you will, and go to joebiden.com. This is our opportunity to make sure we have the resources to compete with a president who will stop at nothing at a time when it's never mattered more. And you heard the vice president earlier said that we've already raised over $1 million with over 30,000 people participating. Not to be competitive or anything, but I think we can beat that, especially if you can dig a little deeper, find just a little bit more to pitch in through that donate link. It's going to make a difference in this all-important, urgent mission of making sure we restore the soul of this country. So thanks to everybody who's part of this. Thanks, Mr. Vice President.
Pete, can I say one thing?
Please.
I truly appreciate the contribution, but what you and I also mention to people is I appreciate you putting your name on the line for me, because people look, of the 35,000 people in this call, people are engaged. Their friends look to them. Who you for? Why you for them? If I had a choice to have you vouching for me or a contribution, I'd take the vouching for you. You're doing both, but thank you. It really, really, really matters. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. And I promise you, I will do my best to never let you down. Thanks. Thanks, Pete.
We're all in. Thank you.
Had to have high hopes for a living, shooting for the stars when I couldn't make a killing. Didn't have a dime, but I always had a vision. Always had high hopes. Had to have high hopes for a living. Didn't know how, but I always had a feeling I was gonna be that one in a million. Always had high hopes. Mama said, fulfill the prophecy, be something great. Go make a legacy, manifest destiny. Back in the days we wanted everything, wanted everything. Mama said, burn your biographies, rewrite your history, light up your wildest dreams, museum victories. Every day we wanted everything, wanted everything. Mama said, don't give up, it's a little complicated, all tied up, no more love.